Welcome to the Ragusia basement. So the other night we had a fire in the fireplace upstairs, and you just let it die out at the end of the night, and here's what's left. This is a piece of wood. I mean, it's black on the outside, but look at it. It's wood, and it's still really, really heavy. It feels like wood, it's gonna burn like wood. But if we keep poking around in these ashes, we're gonna find pieces like this. This started off as wood, but it has become something else. That right there is charcoal. Light as a feather, completely black in color, tends to flake a whole lot. Yeah, that's charcoal right there. We accidentally made charcoal, and I would bet you my whole house that this is the first charcoal. Or rather, this is how ancient people first discovered charcoal. They had a fire, and they went to sleep, and then they looked at it the next day, and in the ash were these black chunks. And then they built another fire for the next day in the same fire pit, and they noticed how well these black chunks burned. They also noticed that it's so light that you can carry it with you if you need to bring fuel with you from one place to another, considering you might be a migratory or a semi-migratory person, you might be a hunter-gatherer, or you might be a soldier on campaign, and you need to bring fuel with you. This weighs absolutely nothing compared to wood, and yet it burns great, burns hotter, burns faster, better for metallurgy, in fact, essential for metallurgy if you're going to make swords for your army, right? A lot of places that didn't have metal, it's not because they didn't have the ore, it's because they didn't have the fuel. And what may be the biggest benefit of charcoal is that it burns really, really cleanly. It doesn't make a lot of smoke. Therefore, you can cook with it without giving away your position to the enemy troops, or without gassing yourself if you're cooking in a little hut. I mean, it's still not a good idea to have a fire in an enclosed space, but you know, you can get away with it to a certain extent when you cook with charcoal, and charcoal remains the fuel of use throughout much of the undeveloped world, or developing world. Hey, what's the difference between charcoal and coal? Well, in many important ways, there is no difference. They kind of are the same substance, they just came about through different means. I actually have a whole lot of coal that I could show you, and it's nearby. See, when we bought this house, we had to tear down a whole bunch of the drywall down here in the finished basement, and when I tore down this drywall, there was a door. That's the door. You want to open it? Turns out we have a coal room underneath the side porch. This is where coal deliveries would have come in through a door on the outside and gone down into this little storage area here where it could be used to fire the coal-fired furnace that would have kept this house warm in decades past. And coal is also wood. It's just wood and other plant matter that happened to live about 350 million years ago. And when it died, it fell into like a wetland or something else that prevented it from being oxidized by the atmosphere. And then it gradually accumulated there, turned into a peat bog. Then that peat bog, oh, I dropped that. And the peat bog kind of got buried deeper, deeper, deeper into the earth, where heat and pressure underneath all of those layers of the earth's crust caused it to kind of compress and also burn away all of the stuff in the wood that isn't carbon. This is pure carbon, or almost pure carbon, that's left from all of that plant matter hundreds of millions of years ago. It's been heated, cooked, squeezed until it is essentially like charcoal. Pure carbon, almost pure carbon. The big practical difference is that this has been compressed, whereas this is not. In fact, charcoal is incredibly porous, because what it essentially is the skeleton of the wood that has been left behind after you've burned away the water and the oils and all of the other stuff that's in the wood. So it's a skeleton. It's just the cellulose and the lignin that used to provide the main structure of the wood, and everything else is gone. And so there's tons and tons of surface area in here, which means you can use just normal unprocessed charcoal as a crude filtration system for water to clean up water that might have a lot of minerals or other yucky stuff in it, make it a little bit nicer to drink. Still wouldn't recommend drinking, from a stagnant pool, even if you pass it through charcoal. Charcoal can't get out bacteria. That said, I would encourage you to remember that not all bacteria are bad. Preach, yells Seed, sponsor of this video. Seed knows we all need good bacteria in our guts to support immune function, skin health, all kinds of things. Seed's DS-01 Daily Synbiotic is a clinically validated 2-for-1 deal. The outer capsule contains a plant-based prebiotic. Prebiotic is basically food for the microbes that are safely ensconced in the inner capsule, and they're in there to protect them on their journey through your digestive system, through the acid of your stomach, and into your colon, where they actually belong. Seed first came into our house when they started supporting my channel, and my wife Lauren really took to it.
They just really help with my digestion, which has gotten worse as I've gotten older, so as many things have as I've gotten older.
You take 2 capsules a day and they send you a travel vial so you don't miss it. Solid glass jars. I love their whole refill system to minimize packaging waste. You can save right now. Use my code RAGUSIA25 at checkout for 25% off your first month of Seed's DSO1 Daily Synbiotic. Thank you, Seed. Anyway, to make charcoal a really effective filter, you have to activate it, and we're going to get back to that. But how do you make it in the first place? Well, I was looking at this manual from the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization for how to make charcoal in the developing world, and they mentioned several methods, including this very tantalizing one, which is making it in a miniature pit, a very simple process. It says to dig a pit that's about a meter square, which I did in my backyard because I just wanted to see if it would work. You get a fire going in the pit, and you get it really, really hot. You need to start with a whole bunch of fuel. Get a whole bunch of wood really, really going inside the pit, and then you cover the pit in a whole bunch of leaves, and then you cover the leaves in dirt. I think the leaves essentially provide a seal, keeps some of the dirt off of your charcoal. And then you just leave it in there for a day. You've basically made a crude earthen oven. An oven that's hot enough to boil away all the water and the oils, other rando chemicals that are in water, make it all go away, but no oxygen, or very little oxygen, is able to make its way into the pit to really fuel the fire and burn the carbon that's left in the wood. And so the carbon doesn't burn, and you're left with what is almost pure carbon. Or at least that is the theory. Let's go ahead and dig this up. This is an enormously crude method with very poor temperature control. We've got lots of totally unburned wood here, and that's perfectly fine. We can just use that for the next fire. Dig down a little bit deeper, and there we go. That is a piece of charcoal. Light as a feather, totally jet black, shiny, that's charcoal. But that's a tremendously inefficient method. Of course, you end up burning a huge amount of wood to produce a really small amount of charcoal, and it isn't even really high quality charcoal. Through the centuries, in different cultures, people have developed all kinds of ingenious ways of piling wood, or maybe encasing it in something to try to minimize the airflow into the wood, to try to get that hot, low oxygen environment, which is also essentially what we had in our dying fire in the fireplace, right? As the fire died away, a lot of these pieces fell down into the ash. Their airflow is restricted, but they were still hot enough to burn away the water and all the other stuff. Modern methods of charcoal production usually involve some kind of retort, which is a closed space that can only let out a small amount of gas. And if you're ever in a survival situation, you can make a crude retort out of a can, or a tin, as the Scots would say. It's just got to have a little hole in the top there, and you fill it really, really tightly with wood, tightly to minimize the airflow in there, right? And then close the lid, you got the opening on top there, and you just throw that directly onto a fire, and you leave it for, this took me a couple of hours to turn into charcoal. First, you start to see some white smoke coming out of the hole. A whole lot of white smoke starts coming out of the hole. That's the water and the oils and stuff boiling away. That white smoke is incredibly flammable, so eventually it's going to catch on the flames and turn into a fire jet. This is called the jetting stage. And if you think about it, what we're doing here is a form of distillation. The same way that you convert wine into brandy or what have you. You just kind of heat something to exactly the point at which the bad stuff goes away and the good stuff remains. It's similar to how mommies and daddies, when they love each other very much and they live in an appropriate jurisdiction, will sometimes take cannabis leaves and put them in a vaporizer that will heat them to exactly the point at which the psychoactive chemicals become volatile and they can be inhaled, but there's no combustion of the actual plant matter that's left behind, and so you don't choke on the smoke. By the way, smoke is probably the main reason why we cook on charcoal today as opposed to wood. Wood makes a whole lot of smoke, especially when it's in that really roaring fire burning stage. It's sending up tons of smoke and ash and creosote and just gross stuff that just ends up on the food. Doesn't taste good. The way that you normally cook with a wood fire is you cook it down to coals, right? You burn the wood down to that stage where all that's left is hot coals, and that's this nice, really clean, super hot fire that's really good for cooking. Anyway, you want to open up the box? You gotta let it cool first, otherwise it might burst into flames upon touching air, and there you go. That is beautiful, beautiful, light as a feather charcoal. Crude, but also easier to do at scale yourself, would be to just burn a fire in that same pit. Get a great big fire going, burn a whole lot of it down to hot coals, and then cut off the flow of oxygen, either by covering up the hole, or you could quench it with water, right? The water immediately cools down the coals so that they don't burn away. It washes away some impurities, and if you don't use too much water, it's all going to get boiled off almost instantly, and you're just left with nice, handleable, dry, beautiful, clean charcoal. And here's something that I'm wondering, and I'm sincerely asking y'all about this because I was not able to find anything scientific about this. I wonder if that might have been the first activated charcoal, coals that people quenched with water. Because the way that you activate charcoal nowadays in the industrial process that was invented in the 19th century is you blow like some inert gas over the coals as they're super hot, and what it does is it causes the structure of the charcoal to expand even more, and you become even more porous, and it becomes even more useful as a filter. I have to imagine that the sudden release of steam that's actually inside the coals when you douse them actually does something similar, maybe expands the interior structure a little bit, makes it a little bit more porous. I don't know. Interesting thing to think about, though. That might have been the first activated charcoal. What sucks is that it's mostly in teeny tiny pieces like this, but teeny tiny pieces like this have a lot of surface area and can burn super hot. The other cool thing that you can do with them is that you can basically make a chicken nugget out of them, grind it down into a fine substance, and then reconstitute it with something sticky to hold it together, a binding agent. Usually it's starch, and that's what charcoal briquettes are like, the ones that look like little nuggets of carbon, which is exactly what they are. Indeed, in a practical sense, charcoal briquettes are probably more similar to coal from the ground because they have been compressed, not by the pressure of the earth, but by the manufacturer. And so they're not light, they're not porous, and when you pick up the bag at the grocery store, it's a super heavy bag as opposed to the bag of natural chunk charcoal, which is super porous and light. Either way, coal, charcoal, what have you, what it really is sunlight from maybe the last couple of years or several 100 million years ago, all stored up in a battery. And when you expose that stored sunlight to air, energy is released, and that's fire, and that's deliciousness. It's cooking, it's wonderful, it's charcoal, it's the best stuff in the world. Oh, let's go burn this.